In a distant town, nestled between vast mountains and rolling green fields, there lived a boy named Elias. He was no ordinary child. While the other children ran through the meadows chasing butterflies and laughing in the golden sunlight, Elias spent his days observing, questioning, and wondering about the world around him. His heart was filled with a longing for justice, for he had seen too much unfairness in his young life. His father, a simple blacksmith, had once been wrongfully accused of a crime he did not commit. Elias had watched helplessly as his father was dragged through the cobblestone streets, chains biting into his wrists, his pleas ignored by the cruel judge who sat atop his throne in the grand courthouse. His father was thrown into the dungeons beneath the town, his crime fabricated by those who held power over the weak. It was on that day, standing in the rain outside the courthouse, that Elias made a vow to fight against the injustice that ruled his town. In this town, there was a judge, a man feared by many. He sat atop his high chair in the grand courthouse, passing judgments without care, without heart, and often, without reason. His name was Judge Aldrich. He was a man whose power was absolute, and his word was law. The townspeople whispered about his greed, his coldness, and his disregard for the truth. Those with wealth and influence could sway him, while the poor and the weak were left with no hope. Elias had seen the pain caused by Judge Aldrich's decisions. He had watched as innocent men were condemned and guilty ones walked free. He had witnessed the helplessness in the eyes of those who had no voice, no chance to fight against the tyranny of the lawman who sat behind the great wooden desk, hammering down his gavel like a god deciding fates. But Elias was not content with watching. He was not willing to sit in silence. One evening, under the dim glow of the lanterns that lined the cobblestone streets, he made a vow to confront the judge, to challenge the injustice that had gripped his town in fear. The day arrived. The courtroom was full. The air was thick with tension, whispers floating like ghosts in the vast hall. And then, the heavy doors creaked open, and Elias stepped forward. A mere boy, no more than 12, his frame small but his presence enormous. His voice, though young, carried the weight of 1,000 unheard cries. Elias did not tremble. He did not falter. He raised his head high, his eyes burning with determination, and he spoke. He told of the lies, the corruption, the sorrow. He told of the unjust rulings, the pain they had caused, the lives they had shattered. He spoke not with anger, but with truth pure and undeniable. The crowd held its breath. The judge, for the first time, found himself without words. The gavel in his hand felt heavy, his robe felt suffocating, his power, for the first time, felt questioned. But Elias' journey did not end there. What followed was a battle far greater than he had ever imagined. The judge, desperate to maintain his grip over the town, sought to silence the boy. He called upon guards, he spread lies, and he turned powerful men against Elias. Yet, the boy did not waver. With every attempt to suppress his voice, Elias found a new way to be heard. He traveled beyond the town, seeking allies in distant lands. He spoke to scholars, to writers, to those who wielded influence beyond the reach of the corrupt judge. His story spread, carried by travelers and merchants, whispered in markets, and inscribed on parchment. The townspeople, once fearful, began to rise. No longer would they allow themselves to be ruled by tyranny. They stood beside Elias, their voices joining his. The court, once a place of fear, became a battlefield for truth. Judge Aldrich, cornered and exposed, faced the wrath of the people he had wronged. His allies abandoned him, his power crumbled, and at last, he was forced to stand trial before those he had once ruled without mercy. As the trial unfolded, the truth unraveled. The bribes, the deception, the lives destroyed, it all came to light. And when the final verdict was given, it was not Elias who had to accept his fate, but the judge himself. Stripped of his title, cast away from the town he had once controlled, Aldrich was left to face the consequences of his own doing. Justice had prevailed, not by force, not by vengeance, but by the unwavering belief of one child in what was right. And so, the town was free once more, not because of kings or warriors, but because a boy named Elias dared to speak the truth. But the journey did not end there. Elias knew that in other towns, in other lands, there were still those who suffered under unjust rulers. And so, he set forth on a new path, one that would take him far beyond the borders of his home. The fight for justice, he knew, was never truly over. But as long as he had breath in his lungs and truth in his heart, he would never stop speaking for those who could not. His travels took him to cities ruled by cruel lords, to villages where the weak suffered in silence. With every new town, he found fresh stories of oppression, new faces of sorrow, and hearts burdened with injustice. Each time, he stood before them, speaking words that ignited flames of courage. Years passed, and Elias' name became legend. Songs were sung of the boy who defied the unjust judge, of the voice that could not be silenced. He gathered followers, people who believed in the power of truth and justice. Together, they formed a movement, a wave of change that swept through lands far and wide. As he grew older, Elias saw the fruits of his labor. Courts once ruled by greed were transformed by honest judges. Tyrants who had believed themselves untouchable were brought to justice. The weak, who had once cowered in the shadows, now stood in the light. But Elias knew that no matter how much was accomplished, there would always be another injustice to fight, another voice to uplift. And so, he continued his journey, his heart unyielding, his spirit unbroken. Let this be a lesson that justice is not an end, but a path. It is walked not by the strongest, nor by the richest, but by those who refuse to turn away from what is right. The courage of one can ignite the strength of many, and even the smallest voice can shake the pillars of injustice. And so, as long as there were wrongs to be righted, Elias would walk on, the boy who once stood against the unjust judge, now a beacon of hope for the world.